So I'm Rosie, if you don't know me. I'm one of the Young Greens co-chairs, but Tom, in the top little box in your corner, is going to be the co-chair, also running most of the session, and we have quite a few of our team on who maybe give a wave as well. And we have all of the deputy leader candidates joining us tonight as well, which is really, really exciting. And for those of you that have been tuning into our events over this kind of really weird lockdown time and period, you'll know that we've been talking an awful lot about how the coronavirus crisis has really, really illustrated to us how broken our political and economic system is, and how actually right now is a really important time to be rethinking and imagining a completely new society, a real break from the history and the systems that have been shown to fail. And we're really excited that this is also a time for us to think about how our political party plays a role in delivering that new alternative. So this is a great time to be quizzing our leaders, and we're so thankful to have you. I'm going to spin over to Katrina, who's going to let you know a little bit more about what's coming up, and then we'll move over to Tom, who's going to kick off the hustings. But thank you so much for joining, and it's great to have you all here. Exciting times.
Great, thank you, Rosie. Hi everyone, I'm Katrina and I'm on the Young Greens executive with Rosie and Tom. I'm the events officer, and I'm just going to tell you a couple of things we've got coming up soon. So on Friday we have more hustings. On Friday we'll have hustings for the House of Lords representative from the Green Party, and that'll be at the same time on Friday, as I said like 3 times, I probably need to say that again. And as well as the Green Party elections, we also have some Young Greens elections going on at the moment, because elections, we just love them. And so there's various different things going on with that. So on Saturday, we will have hustings for our Young Greens executive, because 3 hustings in a week is just the right number of hustings. We just love hustings as much as we love elections. So on Saturday at 7 p.m, you'll be able to quiz the candidates for the Young Greens executive. And what's the other thing you do? Yes, I will be putting some links in at the end, but I'm just going to flag them now. The other thing we're looking for at the moment are people who are interested in helping run our Young Greens liberation groups. And I will put in a link at the end of how you can do that. It's very exciting. And I think that's everything I have to flag for now. We'll come back to me at the end, and I'll put some links in the chat so that you can, well, know how to do those things. But for now, I will throw you back to Tom, who will get us kicked off, because I'm sure you're all eager to hear from our candidates.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Katrina and Rosie, for those introductions. So hi everyone, my name is Tom Hazel, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Young Greens, and I'll be chairing tonight's hustings. So just before we get started, I wanted to run through some of the rules for tonight and tell you how to ask your questions as well. So firstly, rules for you as viewers. Please keep yourself muted throughout the hustings. So Isaac, who's my kind of moderating sidekick tonight, won't have to swoop in and kick you out. And secondly, the way it will work tonight won't be too different from all the hustings you've been to over the past couple of weeks, and be pretty much identical to last week's hustings as well. And I'm sure we've got a lot of people who came to those too. So we're going to start off in just a minute with each of the candidates giving a 3-minute introductory speech and telling you why they think Young Greens should vote for them. And then we'll move straight on to the questions. We've got some pre-submitted questions that some of you will have sent in when you signed up. And if you've got any more questions you'd like to ask tonight, whether they're relevant to things that candidates have said in their answers or things that you forgot to ask put in on the form when you signed up, can you please send a private Zoom message to Rosie with the question, and she'll pass them on to me. She should be quite easy to find for those, because she's got questions here in her name. And we'll try and finish bang on 9:30 tonight with some final appeals from the candidates, and that'll make up the hustings. So with that being said, we're going to move straight on to the candidates' introductory speeches. So we've got as much time to answer your questions as possible. We randomise the order for these, so we'll run through them in the order of Cleo, then Tom, then Andrea, then Nick, then Amelia. So without wasting any more time, I'm going to hand you over to Cleo Lake to kick off our hustings with her introductory speech.
Thank you, Tom, and I hope everyone can hear me okay. And it's great to be here tonight. I'm not feeling very well, but it was very important for me to be here. So I hope I can still do my best. I'm Cleo, I'm based in Bristol, and I'm a mum. I have 3 children who are 23, 17 and 10. So I'm always with younger people. And as well as being a mum, I have also started mentoring young people. And in my city, I have helped and assisted to set up an African Caribbean Assembly youth chapter, which is about people of African Caribbean descent, young people having more of a say and being more invested in the city. and being part of decision making. So I'm very much in favour of people's assemblies. I've worked in the arts and culture field for over 13 years as an artist and also as a producer. In that time, I've been an arts and events manager, a dance facilitator, and also the chair of St. Paul's Carnival, which is one of the biggest cultural events and cohesion events in the UK. This has also been alongside my activism and my political career. And of late, I've been lobbying more for a better deal for creatives and for freelancers, which I think is incredibly important. And as many of us may be aware, many of these people have fallen through the gaps in terms of what has been on offer in terms of support. I've also recently joined Culture Declares, which is a movement, a national movement, to get institutions, art organisations and individuals to make their own pledges and declarations in terms of the climate emergency. But as well as that, I think that Culture Declares is good, but I think Culture Demands is more relevant. I don't think we have any chance of mitigating the climate emergency if we do not urgently address the poverty, inequality and inequity emergency, which is global. I was elected as a Green Councillor in 2016, and I've worked hard in that role, and I've also remained an activist. So I've bridged the gap between official politician and on the ground grassroots campaigner. Some of the campaigns I've worked on are Justice for Judah, where we saw one of our elders in Bristol tasered by the police in a case of mistaken identity, also the Windrush saga, and more recently, or not more recently, past couple of years, reparations. And I'm happy to see that Greens have led history in the UK in the last couple of weeks with getting some reparations motions through to councils, which is fantastic. I would just like to say to everyone here tonight that as your deputy leader, I would definitely be someone who is accessible and would definitely support all the amazing work that you're already doing.
Thank you very much, Cleo. Right on time there. So for our next introductory speech, we're going to move over to Tom Pashby. Take it away,
Thank
Tom.
you. Thanks, other Tom. Yeah, hi, my name's Tom. I'm running for Deputy Leader of the Green Party. My pronouns are they, them. I set up Young Greens at Plymouth University in 2013, and I helped run 4 Young Green candidates for the City Council elections in 2014, which was very exciting. And I was also elected to the Young Greens executive between 2014 and 2016. And I edited the Young Green manifesto, which I think was for the 2015 general election, but it might have been the 2016 European elections. I can't quite remember, but I did do one. So I joined the Green Party when I realised the other political parties had failed to protect our environment. I believe my broad experience in the party, helping others get elected, and putting myself forward for public office in a wide range of political contexts, places me well to be a voice for the party in England and Wales. We know that capitalism has failed and is wrecking people's lives and our planet. The Green Party has a fantastic policy platform which says we need to move away from consumption-based growth, concentrating wealth into the hands of the few, and towards a localised circular economy which values well-being. To those who think we should seek to establish a politics beyond left and right, that's simply not the world we live in. People want to know where we stand, and we stand firmly on the side of the most marginalised communities, the key workers keeping the country going, and the campaigners who believe we can avert a climate crisis. A universe-based can come on top of a reformed welfare state, a Green New Deal with a million high-quality jobs. These are all policies which we agree are great and just, but by shying away from being clear about our politics, I believe we do ourselves a disservice. Another great green policy is our commitment to the rights of trans and non-binary people. Greens have spent years writing good policies on LGBTIQ+ rights, but a small vocal minority of people in our party have put our credibility with the LGBTIQ+ community at risk. As a non-binary person myself, I'm acutely aware of how damaging that small minority of voices can be. Risking our credibility like this makes it more difficult for us to take action on the climate emergency. The 2019 general election saw our most recent attempt to reach across party lines and put simpler choices for voters at the ballot box in order to get out the Tories. Labour ignored the Unite to Remain alliance and the government got a massive majority. We need to recognise that the attempts at electoral pacts have failed and to move on, And as your deputy leader, I would use my influence to argue against further such experiments and instead ask all voters in England and Wales to vote Green. We've seen what one Green in the room can do, shifting the debate and creating space for political allies to take forward our policies into action. The climate emergency and the impacts of austerity can't wait for us to find the perfect electoral pact. So I'm asking for you to vote for me as number 1 for deputy leader, so I can be a strong Green left voice for the party, build back our credibility on trans rights, and get the Greens into power so we can tackle the climate emergency. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tom, for that introductory speech. So next we're going to move over to Andrea for her introductory speech. So over to you, Andrea.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, I'm Andrea Carey-Fuller. I'm also a mum, and I'm always in touch with young people's issues because my daughter's 17 and I'm her strongest advocate and supporter. So I've helped her through a whole series of issues to do with education, mental health, etc. And turning her into a right little Green activist. I've been a member of the Children's Rights Alliance for England for decades now, and this is a movement to get the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child into UK law. So just like we have the UN Convention of Human Rights in UK law and the Human Rights Act, we really need to get the UNCRC into law so that children and young people's rights are properly recognised. I've also spoken at Goldsmiths. I've shared a platform with Owen Jones to support young students' rights for better housing and for mental health services. And I've done a couple of bits of campaigning at Goldsmiths actually. At Freshers' Fairs, when we used to be allowed to have a Green Party table, I helped set up a Young Greens group there many years ago. And I think we were probably one of the first parties, maybe along with Tom, but in Lewisham, I advocated for a Young Greens officer as part of the officer group for Lewisham Greens. I've campaigned to save Tydemill Wildlife Garden and also campaigned to save a ballpark in Deptford, which young people were using for football. Because unfortunately the school that had been rebuilt had privatised their football scheme and these kids didn't have anywhere to play. I've also campaigned for empty office blocks to be used for young single homeless people in Lewisham. I definitely support the Future Generations Bill, and I've done some campaigning with the Rio Ferdinand's Invest in Youth work when that was going on in 2016. One of the things that I do is I volunteer for a neighbourhood forum, and some of the aspects of that are really important for me, and one of those is this idea of having child-friendly cities, because if we do everything around children and young people, then it's good for everyone else in terms of the environment, but also things like looking at empty shops. And I've asked many times of Lewisham Council for these to be used as incubator spaces for young people to set up business ideas so they get them rent-free.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to stop you there on the 3-minute mark.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that introductory speech.
Okay.
And we're going to move on next to Nick Humberstone for his introductory speech. So go ahead, Nick.
Hi everyone, I'm Nick Humberstone. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm standing to be your next deputy leader. I want politics to be for everyone. Politics, we have to remember, is about people coming together and deciding how they want society to be. Right now, those decisions aren't being made by the people. They're being made by some people. We can see it in Parliament, and we can see it in our own membership too. Politics isn't diverse, and we aren't a diverse movement, and that has to change. As your next deputy leader, there's 3 things that I want to change. The first one is that we need to use language better. The purpose of language is to communicate messages. We keep using complicated words when simple words would work just as well. I've felt barriers myself because of language when it comes to getting involved in politics. I talk in a pretty casual way, and that won't change if I'm elected. I think it's a really strong way to connect with ordinary people, not just political people. We also need to talk about the right policies. We're a political party, so we have to have an answer for everything. We need to show that we're ready to deliver a society that works for everyone, that tackles inequality, that tackles discrimination, and makes the lives of people across England and Wales happier, as well as tackling climate change. We can't expect people who are having to choose between heating their home and eating to support us if they think we only care about the environment. We're a party standing for social and environmental justice equally, and we need to make sure everyone knows it. The last thing is that we need to work with others. It's not just part of our path to success, it's the kind of politics we want to be doing in Parliament and the kind of politics we want to see in our communities as well. When people work together, they can achieve so much more. Now, we won't always agree with other parties, and that's okay, but we should be offering to work with them at every opportunity. When it comes to climate, there's only 10 years, when it comes to the climate, there's only 10 years left. And when it comes to people, we can't wait any longer. If you want politics to be about working together to deliver a society that works for everyone, then please make me your first choice for Deputy Leader. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. So for our final introductory speech, I'm going to hand you straight over to Amelia Womack. So go ahead, Amelia.
Thank you. And thanks so much for being here tonight. It's great to see, as Rosie said, so many familiar faces and new faces as well. So I'm Amelia Womack and I'm asking you to re-elect me as Deputy Leader. I was first elected Deputy Leader in 2014 when I'd been working to ensure that we had young candidates in council elections and making sure that we were talking about youth representation in politics. And essentially the Young Greens told me to put my money where my mouth was and to run for Deputy Leader to ensure that we were putting those issues on the agenda. The issues that we face as a younger generation, whether that's issues around rent, whether that's issues around having paid an extortionate amount of money for university fees or had our opportunities stripped away as a result of recessions and obviously the upcoming recession and current recession as well. I've spoken out on many issues, whether that's been votes at 16, making sure that we're talking about equal wages for equal work for young people and ending the pay discrimination that young people face, as well as supporting the climate strikers across the UK. I truly believe that we need to be electing more young Green candidates across the country as well and continue to be inspired of the incredible work that our young Green councillors, some of whom are in this meeting as well, have been doing across the country. And it's really empowering to know that young people are having their voices heard. During my time as Deputy Leader, I've seen us through 3 general elections that's had our highest general election results, our European elections that saw us more than double the number of MEPs we've had, as well as council elections where we've increased our councillors year upon year until we doubled them, or just over doubled, more than doubled them in the last council elections. I always work at the grassroots. Politics happens on doorsteps and happens in communities. And I want to always work to make sure that I'm with you in your communities and listening to the problems that you have, as well as bringing press and media to ensure that your campaigns get the press attention that they truly deserve. I have extensive press experience, having taken on Andrew Neil and Piers Morgan. I've been on every major news channel, as well as have had articles, quotes and comment pieces in The Independent, The Guardian, The New Statesman, Vogue, The Daily Telegraph, Grazia, to name but a few, as well as having a weekly column in The Independent during the 2019 general election, where I was able to ensure that there was a green analysis of what was happening during that election period that was promoted across the country. I've worked to make sure that we support diversity, having ring-fenced money for diverse candidates to ensure that we basically remove the barriers as to why people don't stand. With a bumper year of elections on the horizon, including the Welsh Parliament, as well as the council elections we should have had this year and the scheduled one for next year, I want to use all of my knowledge of how we win as Greens, how we campaign and how we get heard to ensure that we continue to build our party to be a political force.
Amelia, I'm going to interrupt you there to finish off the last of our introductory speeches. Well, thank you everyone for those introductory speeches, and we're going to move straight on to the questions. And I'll make sure that when we have the questions, I'll repeat these each time and put them in the chat too. As with last time, we're not going to stick a hard limit on candidates' answers lengths, but I have asked the candidates before to keep them somewhere around the 2 to 3 minute mark, and I'll start butting in if they're much longer than that. So the order we'll answer this first question, which is a pre-submitted one, is this. We're going to go first to Tom, then to Andrea, then to Nick, then to Amelia, then to Cleo. Tom, your first question is, in light of the recent events, what will candidates do to ensure that we actively are at the forefront of tackling anti-Semitism within society? So go ahead, Tom.
Do I repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sure. In light of recent events, what will candidates do to ensure that we actively are at the forefront of tackling anti-Semitism within society?
So I guess there's a few levels to this. As a party, we need to make sure that our own house is in order on anti-Semitism, to make sure that if it does appear, that we deal with it properly and that the complaints process is robust. And more widely, as a campaigning party, we need to be making sure that social media companies are stamping down on anti-Semitism where it appears, as is not being done at the moment. For example, like the Wiley thing at the moment, and I'm participating in the 48 hours of silence on Twitter from Monday at 9 until tomorrow at 9, to kind of highlight that it's not okay for these kind of unregulated spaces to continue being unregulated while social media companies make a huge amount of money off of them. And also making sure that Jewish Greens are empowered in the party. That's what we can do as a party, and make sure that people feel like they can be vocally Jewish, I guess, is another thing within our own party. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much, Tom, for your answer on that question. So now over to Andrea. Andrea, in light of recent events, what will candidates do to ensure that we are actively at the forefront of tackling anti-Semitism within society?
Okay, obviously as Greens, we should be making sure that we're at the forefront of tackling any form of discrimination against any people. And I too have joined the 48-hour silence on Twitter. So I won't be going back on Twitter until after 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Obviously, I think the anti-Semitism is a difficult issue because there's two issues here. One is obviously discriminating against people purely based on their religion, which is out of order. But there is still a right for people to speak up against how the Israeli government treats the Palestinian people, and that's completely different. And in the past, I've been a co-proposer for the boycott, divestment and sanctions motion against Israel, which basically is saying that, we expect the UK government and other governments around the world to and companies to boycott Israel until it treats Palestinians with respect. And you'll find that there's a huge amount of Jewish people that support that. I went on a march several years ago, Peace for Gaza, and that was Jewish people and Palestinian people together. Just like you've got in Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, you've got people that cross boundaries to come together for peace. You've got a huge movement of people that do want peace in the Middle East, and I really hope that we can get that. But I think we do need to be very careful that we make that distinction, and that everybody supports Jewish people to have their rights, their views, and a lot of Jewish people want to see their Israeli government act in a more humane way towards Palestinians. So just be careful, people, about this debate. Okay.
Perfect, thanks. Before we move on, is there anything specifically you wanted to say about challenging anti-Semitism, or are you happy for us to move on to Nick?
Well, I started the conversation saying that we should challenge any anti-Semitism, of course, but we do need to be careful that what we're challenging is people discriminating against people purely because they're Jewish. But to actually condemn the Israeli government for their actions is not anti-Semitic, and there's a difference. And that's what I'm saying, that we need to be careful to separate the two.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Well, we'll move on to Nick then for his answers to this question. Nick, in light of recent events, what will candidates do to ensure that we actively are at the forefront of tackling anti-Semitism within society? Nick, over to you.
So obviously anti-Semitism is definitely a problem, and we definitely need to be being proactive in addressing that problem. I know that there's a motion coming to conference and also to the Young Greens Convention, which you should of course all go to, about some guidance towards dealing with anti-Semitism, part of that including the IHRA definition. I haven't fully read through it yet, but it's very likely that I will be supporting it because I know that includes the IHRA definition. I think we need to work out how we can guarantee some representation for the Jewish community within the Green Party as well. We obviously have this proposed new constitution coming up with the council, which is going to be 50 people, which is a really great opportunity to have a genuinely representative group of people. And I think we definitely need to ask questions about, should we try and find guaranteed space and have a reserved space for someone from the Jewish Greens? I also understand that obviously anti-Semitism is really difficult, quite often quite difficult to tackle, because a lot of it isn't that overt nowadays. A lot of it is kind of a bit more hidden and subtle, and it's linked often within left-wing politics. So we need to make sure we have a really clear stance and we communicate that effectively within the membership and also outside to, I guess, raise awareness of where these problems can happen and how people need to challenge their own views to make sure that they're not falling into anti-Semitic views.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Nick. So the next person to answer this question will be Amelia. So Amelia, one more time, in the light of recent events, what will candidates do to ensure that we are actively at the forefront of tackling anti-Semitism within society?
It's what's happened over the weekend. What's happened over the weekend has really proved how rife anti-Semitism is, and how people putting forward anti-Semitic views has basically drilled up a lot of anti-Semitism that has been under the surface. Like the others, I've been part of the 48-hour boycott, but I also think as Greens, what we need to be doing is ensure that we promote the voice and work of our Jewish Greens. I've worked with Zach Polanski as well and have supported the green IHRA definition that has gone through our conference, because I think it's important that we're very clear about where we stand on anti-Semitism as well as Islamophobia, and any hate that there is in our society must be tackled within the party. I too am pro-Palestine and Palestinian rights, but I don't think this should come at the cost at diluting any form of tackling anti-Semitism. This is why at our conference, I tried to organise an event that basically was about giving people the tools to talk about many of these complex issues while not falling into anti-Semitic tropes that have been so rife within social media and things like that, that I think it's easy for people to not understand why things are anti-Semitic. And I wanted to ensure that we had a platform where people were very clear about where anti-Semitism is, what it sounds like, to ensure that people aren't using any kind of speech that aggressively and directly hurts, undermines, and effectively is bigoted towards another group of people. I think we need to challenge that as Greens when we see it. We need to be making sure we're speaking out when we see it. And we need to, I think that it's also important that we're tackling many of the issues on Twitter. I've met with Twitter in the past to talk about effectively harassment on social media and what that means for many groups of people and the intersectional aspects of in between. I know the abuse that I get, for example, is nothing compared to what women of colour receive on Twitter. It was clear to me that there was a real gap between what was happening and what was possible. And I think we need to continue to hold those social media companies to account to ensure that they are not using their platform to enable any kind of hatred, and especially tackling lots of the anti-Semitism that has gone unchecked for too long. And I think that we as Greens have a real voice in making sure that we tackle that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Amelia. So for our last answer to this question, we'll move to Cleo, and I'm going to repeat that question just one more time. So in the light of recent events, what will candidates do to ensure that we actively are at the forefront of tackling anti-Semitism within society? Over to you, Cleo.
Yeah, I would agree that education is really important. So it's important that as members and as a Green Party community, we do have a significant briefing so that everyone is on the same page, understands what it is, can spot it, and can call it out when they see it. We must be encouraging people to challenge such racism when we see it. Again, communication for that is really important so that people can understand when they might cross the line and hope that they will learn enough and be educated so they don't cross the line. I think it is important that we work with the community, so that we work closely with Jewish Greens and other groups, but not necessarily expecting them to educate us. I know that Greens of Colour, for example, have been planning a meeting anyway with Jewish Greens, and I look forward to being part of that. I would agree with what others have said, that we should be a party that doesn't tolerate discrimination and racism in any of its forms, whether that's anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, or also Afrophobia, which is a term that some of you may not have heard of, but it's very much alive, Afrophobia, and it's a more detailed way of explaining the historic and contemporary racism against people of African heritage. I think it's also worth reflecting, without trying to go off the point too much, that there has been a significant surge in racism generally since Black Lives Matter movement in the UK, and that what is quite obvious is that there are some really disturbing attitudes that still exist out there, and perhaps we've been in a bit of an illusion over the past decade with political correctness to think that these attitudes don't exist, but of course they do, and which is why it's so important that as a party we're constantly calling this out.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much to all the candidates for your answers to that question. In the interest of time, we're going to move straight on to the next question, and the order for the answers for this question will be Andrea, then Nick, then Amelia, then Cleo, and then Tom. This question is one that's been asked tonight, and it is, can you talk about how your experience demonstrates that you have the required commitment for the deputy leader role? So we're going to go straight to you, Andrea, for your answer on this question.
Okay, I think there's lots of qualities that the deputy leader needs, and one of those is life experience. It's got to be, because this is a really important position. We're, to co-lead a party of 52,000 members, and all of those members of different age groups, different backgrounds, different experiences. So I think there needs to be a sort of proven track record of working within different community campaigns and being aware about policy and issues. And I mean, just in that first question, we've already alluded to the difficulties there are with the IHRA versus the boycott, divestment sanctions motions, for example, on the anti-Semitism issue. So with everything, there is always more than one side, and I think people need to have information, but also need to be open to speaking to different groups about things in order to come to a sort of predetermined view about sort of the way forward for the Greens. And I think one of the things that I can offer is the fact that I'm a non-practicing human rights barrister, but sort of that aside, what I've done is I've spent nearly 30 years working with different community groups. I've worked a lot with young people. I've helped young refugees and asylum seekers. I've worked with young homeless people. I've looked after children. When the Youth Parliament was just setting up in Essex, I made sure that I put forward a motion that they should save places for looked after children, because I could see that they're at an obvious disadvantage. I have actually got sort of quite a good ability to spot opportunities relating to policy and strategy. So, for example, in our COVID-19 world, I'm really pushing with Green Party Women the Ethical Care Charter, which is really important because it's about social care. So even though this might not affect young Greens now, it probably does in terms of somebody in your families, you know, whether it's grandparents or even other people that you know. So, you know, this is a really good initiative to improve social care and the rates of pay and the lives of people providing care. And we know that there's a very huge shortage of people operating in social care, and there's a huge demand, especially if we get another spike of COVID-19. So I think sort of a combination of experiences is really important. The ability to listen and empathise and to negotiate a way forward, but also to work in collaboration. And again, that's something I'm good on. I've worked in collaboration not only with other political parties on issues, but with different organisations, whether it's Global Justice Now or Friends of the Earth. So I think all of those things come into play.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andrea, for your answer to that question. So we're going to move over to Nick next. And one more time, that question was, can you talk about how your experience demonstrates you have the required commitment for the deputy leader role?
So I'm 24 and I've only been interested in politics for 3 years. So in terms of time that I've had to gain experience, it's obviously less than some of the other candidates. Before then, I thought that there were two parties, you vote in one, they get elected, then they kind of just argue about each other and the other side criticises them, and then nothing really happens and they occasionally switch sides. I don't think that's a particularly unique view that I held. I think that's a view that a lot of people in the UK feel, because they feel so disconnected from politics. Politics is at heart, as I said in my opening speech, is about people. It's about people deciding how they want the society around them to be. And I think the two really important things to focus on, well, the main thing to focus on is compassion, and having compassion to work with others and also to understand the kind of philosophy that we draw from having a politics about compassion, about caring that some people have been are in really disadvantaged situations and that we really need to support and care for them and help them be on the same footing as everyone else. I think with a movement that is focused on localized politics and having people work together, genuine people in the communities, not political people, not politicians, I think having someone who is more of an ordinary person sends a really powerful message of the kind of movement we are to everyone else. The other things are, I think that it's really important to have someone that listens, and I've spent a lot of time recognizing my own privilege and my own situations and trying to work on and listen to others. And I think having someone that can listen and pays a lot of attention to that will probably be more useful than someone that's just got experience because they've written a lot of articles and they've been in the media quite a bit. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Nick, for your answer to that one. So we're going to move over to Amelia next. So Amelia, can you talk about how your experience demonstrates that you have the required commitment for the deputy leader role?
So having done the role for 6 years, it is a tough job. It's working at the grassroots, it's being with local parties, which means a lot of travel across the country. I've shown an unwavering commitment to that, ensuring that I've been delivering in the role, whether that's being on doorsteps or being in the press and media. But I do think that the word experience in this isn't the best word to be using. I think for young people, I see young councillors doing incredible things, whether that's Jamie Osborne in Norwich passing a UBI motion, Nanette Youssef talking about how we decolonise our environmental movement, Amy Healy, obviously in administration at the moment in Brighton Council and paving the way to talking about car-free cities. Young people have been lots of people say young people are the future, but I think that young people are the now and present and showing what we can build as a result of a clear green vision of how we ensure that we tackle inequality while staying below 1.5 degrees of warming and tackling the ecological emergency at the same time. So I think I've got the skills and experience of doing that, of doing the job, but I also hope that as young Greens, you don't let words such as experience hold you back on what you can achieve, because no one understands what it's like to be 18, 25, 29 in 2020 unless you're living it. And I know that the experiences that you've had are unique, that people have felt oppressed by political decisions that have meant that young people have been, well, I was joking earlier about, I always use the joke about the brunt of the cuts, because it's something you really don't want to say incorrectly. And with recession and Brexit on the horizon, the rights for young people have, and opportunities for young people have completely changed. So I think that I have the experience, but I hope all of you know that you've got the experience to be doing incredible jobs as young leaders in whatever you want to achieve. It's not about life experience, it's about speaking out, campaigning, and ensuring that we build a better future.
Thank you very much, Amelia. So the next person to answer this question will be Cleo. So Cleo, can you talk about how your experience demonstrates that you have the required commitment for the deputy leader role?
Sure. Well, I think it's a combination of experience, guts, empathy, and heart that makes me an excellent candidate. I've been, as I said earlier, I've been an elected councillor since 2016, and that's given me a range of experiences. Prior to that, I also said I was the chair of St. Paul's Carnival, an event that attracts 100,000 people into a residential area every year and is in its 52nd year. I took that on in 2012, when frankly no one else would, because it was at one of the lowest points in the carnival's history, when funding was about to be pulled, the event was cancelled, and the main stakeholders, largely the local community, were absolutely in uproar. That was a massive challenge. It was something that I had to front. I am part of the community, so I had to work with local authorities and other stakeholders, and there was a lot to negotiate. That was a real baptism of activism. I also had to do the press through that period, and that really set me up for my ability now to be very comfortable giving interviews, etc. And I think an important part of this is how you present and how you get the message across in the media. I went on to be the Lord Mayor of Bristol, 2018 to 2019, which was an amazing experience, but it was a very busy experience. I could be going to up to 8 different engagements a day, 7 days a week. It was relentless, but you know, I enjoyed it, and wherever I went, I put the smile on my face and I gave the energy and attention to the people I met or the events that I was requested to speak at. I've worked with a wide range of communities, and that is one of my strong points, the ability to not be afraid to go and make that initial move, to go and meet people where they are and do the outreach work. I'm brave. I'm not afraid to say what I think needs to be said, even at times when no one else wants to say it. I'm proactive. I'm a doer. I'm very good at outreach, as I've said. I'm credible. I have a track record. And I'm really standing as well, because taking up that position of Lord Mayor, I realised how much it meant to other people, younger people, activists coming up behind me. And I understood that it's important to be in these positions and do what you can to encourage other people who may be from an underprivileged background socially, or they may be people of colour, women of colour. For me to be in that position, it tells people that it is possible and that you can do it. It won't always be easy, but it can be done. I would also say that my leadership style incorporates fun, and I don't think there's nearly enough fun in politics. And I think it's a great skill to be able to have a laugh and shouldn't be underestimated. And it will definitely get me through, and hopefully people around me through, when times are more challenging.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Cleo. We've got one answer left to this question, and that will be from Tom. So Tom, can you talk about how your experience demonstrates that you have the required commitment for the deputy leader role?
Yeah, thank you. I'll just start by saying that I am very committed to the cause of climate justice and social justice. eco-anxiety is something that genuinely keeps me up at night, and it's kind of that reason that gives me the fire to keep on doing what I'm doing, which is doing an awful lot of stuff in the Green Party and a lot of other things. So I did environmental science at university. That was my undergraduate degree. That kind of radicalised me on environmentalism. I've been involved in the Young Greens and the Green Party since about 2012. As I said at the beginning, I set up Young Greens at Plymouth University. I've run in 3 different local council elections with different levels of success. And I've also run in 2 different general elections. And these have all been in a combination of Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem areas, and also rural and urban. So I feel like I've got quite a broad breadth of like speaking to people on doorsteps and trying to find common ground with them. Professionally, I've been working in energy and climate policy and communications for about 6 years now, and that includes at the European level, at the national level. I've done lots of writing and media, so I've written for national newspapers. I've been on TV and radio, which is regularly daunting when it comes up, but I love the opportunity to do a lot more of that if I was deputy leader. I've also done a lot at the grassroots. I've spoken to probably thousands of people on doorsteps now and handed out leaflets to people that don't really want to take leaflets. So I've got lots of experience of speaking with like normal people. I've also set up an all-party parliamentary group in Parliament on the role of the House of Lords. So I've got experience of directly lobbying MPs and peers and trying to influence the government and shadow ministers, etc. And working with House authorities. And also I worked with Jenny Jones a couple of years ago to get a couple of parliamentary questions tabled on the rights of non-binary people, which got some attention in the national press, which is fantastic. So I've got a broad range, but obviously we do have quite a high calibre of candidates in this election, so we'll have to see.
Thank you so much, Tom. So that concludes all our answers to that question. So we're going to move on to the next question now, and the order we're going to take this one in is going to be Cleo, then Tom, then Andrea, then Nick, then Amelia. So this question, firstly to you, Cleo, is anything north of Watford tends to miss out on a lot of focus. How do you think you can make the Green Party appeal to a wider audience than just the south, southeast, that the majority of membership is originated from and activity takes place in?
Yes, good question. And I think that is a lot of people's perception, both from within the party and from the outside, that it seems to be London-centric or southeast and southwest. London, Bristol, Brighton seem to be the hotspots, maybe Stroud as well. But I think this is something that is a wide issue generally with the UK. You know, even priorities in terms of funding and things like that have traditionally gone more south and not north and everything else. So I think one of my strategies actually to address this would of course be linking more purposefully with regional parties, with regional groups, and supporting them, but also to definitely link and work with the trade union rep that we're about to elect as well. I think that's a really crucial piece of work, because I think then we're going right to the heart of working class communities and others. And I think it's incredibly important that that is prioritised, because that is the very demographics, I would argue, that our policies could work very well for, and that we would do better to recruit more into our membership. So I do share the concerns that the love needs to be spread a little further than how it may traditionally seem for the Green Party, and it's definitely something that I would enjoy doing. Definitely, I enjoy outreach work, so that would be something that would be on my list to do.
Perfect. Thank you, Cleo. So we're going to move over to you, Tom, for your answers to this question next. And once more, that question was, anything north of Watford tends to miss out on a lot of focus. How do you think that you can make the Green Party appeal to a wider audience than just the south and southeast that the majority of membership is originated from and activity takes place in?
Well, thank you. Yeah, the north does tend to miss out on investment and is more likely to experience, people in the north are more likely to experience poverty and multiple deprivation. Part of my campaign for deputy leadership is to get the party to be more vocally left-wing and to be better communicating how social justice is linked with climate justice and how you can't have just one or the other, and that they aren't to the detriment of either of them either. So you can absolutely have social justice with climate justice, and that doesn't mean that we aren't still a Green Party which fights for environmentalism. So in terms of social justice policies, I think that one of our best policies is universal basic income on top of a reformed welfare state. That would mean that people who are in very precarious jobs can feel more secure. It's something that's reached the national stage in terms of our debate recently, in the lead up to the furlough scheme being enacted. And I think that we've got a real opportunity to push for that again and get Labour on board with it. As Deputy Leader, I would definitely be making an effort to go around as much of the country as possible, but particularly the North and the Midlands, because most of my experience personally is in London, South East and South West. And that just happens to be where a lot of our activists and target seats are. But I definitely want to be going up to the North, going to our local parties and making sure that they're getting what they need, and that those areas get the attention they need in their local press and in terms of building their profile with other local groups, etc. And also, I love meeting new people. I am missing out on that right now in lockdown, and I want to be able to get out there and speak to people that are my immediate group of friends.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tom. So Andrea, we'll move over to you next. So anything north of Watford tends to miss out on a lot of focus. How do you think that you can make the Green Party appeal to a wider audience than just the South and South East the majority of membership has originated from and activity takes place in?
Okay, well, some of that is looking at the resources that parties in the North have, in North East and North West region. And I know for a fact that North East region, they've only got a sort of a part-time region coordinator. So in terms of being able to sort of build up resources and capacity, they could do with a full-time regional coordinator. So it's looking at things like that in terms of resources, but then it's looking at how, as a party, we use national campaigning to get our message out there, to not only recruit new members to support what we're doing, but also to encourage people to vote for us, because as you know, we've started to do really well in local elections, especially in places like Norwich and Liverpool. And we really need to build on that. And one of the things, as you know, that I've mentioned already, that is going to be a nationwide campaign through elected Green councillors, is the Ethical Care Charter. And just picking up on what Cleo said about working closely with trade unions, that's a unison initiative. So, if we do things like that, and also Norwich has got the pilot for universal basic income, there's nothing to stop other pilots in other areas, especially in some of the more deprived areas in the country, which do tend to be in the north, well, not just the north, but Wales and other places too. So I think we should do that. One of the other campaigns I do is a campaign for housing as a human right, because that affects everybody. And I did put a few years ago to Caroline Lucas the idea of an early day motion on suspending the right to buy in all English cities, and that would make a tremendous difference to the housing issue we've got with 1.5 million people on the housing list. So we need to look at the areas of focus like the NHS, housing, social care and income, and obviously climate campaigning that affect everybody, and use that to really promote what it means to be green and why people should vote for us and join us in all areas of the country, but especially the north.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for your answer to that question. So we're going to move over to Nick next for his. And Nick, that question once more was, anything north of Watford tends to miss out on a lot of focus. How do you think you can make the Green Party appeal to a wider audience than just the South or South East that the majority of membership has originated from and activity takes place in? Nick?
I think a lot of the problem is the talking about the right policies and also talking about it with the right messaging. One of the examples that I thought of, if we think of how we've been talking about the rail fares going up every year, we always talk about it going up, and we always have this very London-centric, even more than just like South and Eastern-centric, but London-centric view of, oh, it's commuters' fares going up, and we're always talking about the lines coming into London. When we have to remember that there are people where trains are not particularly accessible, where buses are the only option, and buses only come every 20 minutes, half an hour, or sometimes even longer. So we really need to make sure that we're speaking to people in the Green Party in those areas to make sure that our messaging actually fits a purpose for those people there. We definitely need to talk about the social justice issues more, because they are affecting people's daily lives a lot more significantly than climate change. Obviously, climate change is happening, it's affecting everyone, but in order for someone to want to vote for us and to understand why we're a great option for them to vote in an election, we need to be talking about issues that are on their doorstep that they can relate to right now. As to what I can do as a deputy leader candidate, I grew up in Essex and I now live in London, so I haven't travelled around the country much. So I would want to travel around the north specifically and spend quite a lot of time going around the north, speaking to local parties and speaking to members of the public around there. And going even further than that, hopefully trying to arrange some way that I can sleep on people's sofas and actually have a lived experience of people's daily lives in those communities. Because if I can get closer to that lived experience, then I can be a much better voice for the people in those communities.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Nick. So for the last answer to this question, we're going to go to Amelia. So Amelia, anything north of Watford tends to miss out on a lot of focus. How do you think that you can make the Green Party appeal to a wider audience than just the south or southeast that the majority of membership is originated from and activity takes place?
Thank you. We've heard a lot about the North and Wales, and I just want to say, hey, people in the Midlands, I see you too. In the Green Party, the most under-resourced places are the North East, East Midlands and Wales. We have a cycle where essentially your capitations are based on your membership numbers, and it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way that you have less members, so you have less money, which means that you're not able to do as much as other areas. I think what's really important as leaders is about empowering local communities and local activists. It's by giving people the tools to succeed that we make success happen. I know that the visits that I provided are about making sure that we're engaging members of the public, getting activists out and bringing press and media. But what you leave behind in terms of skills and understanding is the most important thing, because the only way that we win, the only way that we get our message as far out as possible is by being on doorsteps, speaking to communities, and to do that we need to engage more activists. I think it's been really important that while looking at campaign school, we've distributed that support across the country, making sure it's those with upcoming elections that are given the tools to ensure that they're able to work to increase their number of councillors, as well as work to increase their number of members as well. With introducing things like Action Network, once again, it's about giving tools to your local communities to ensure that we can use all of those different aspects of politics, whether that's petitioning, lobbying, and making sure that we're using that in a productive way to engage people and ensure that they continue to support the Green Party. So I think it's really important with the upcoming elections as well. Effectively, we do have a number of high-profile elections happening. We've got the Welsh Parliament, of which I am lead list candidate in South Wales East, and hope that we can make history for our party as well as for Wales by getting our first Green elected here. But I also think it's important that we do support our Bristol mayoral campaign, which has obviously been postponed, and do push for those opportunities in London to try and make sure we get more Green Assembly members. I think it's a real tough balance, but I think that by working and supporting everyone, we need to ensure that we are getting the most Greens elected, engaging more membership and ensuring that we're supporting across the country, especially those regions that have been under-supported and have felt under-supported for such a long time. Because I think that with all of these tools, it's each and every one of us, to be honest, not just the leadership, it's each and every one of us that goes on to make those big wins happen. And that's why leadership is about empowering people, not just about being there.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all the candidates for those questions, and also thank you very much for keeping to the time limit so far. We're doing remarkably better than we were last week in getting through these questions. But for the next couple of questions, I'm going to ask you to make the answers a bit more quick fire, maybe a sentence or two on each, and they are a bit funner as well, so you can relax for a couple of seconds. And for these next two, we're going to answer them in the order of Amelia, then Cleo, then Tom, then Andrea, and then Nick. So this first question, and I think it probably only needs a sentence, Amelia, is what is your favourite flavour of crisps?
I love chili crisps, especially dipped in hummus.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Amelia. Cleo, what's your favourite flavour of crisps?
Difficult one. I'd probably go for prawn cocktail.
Not bad. Tom, what about you? What's your favourite flavour of crisps?
I've just discovered this, so it's kind of cheating a bit, but it's paprika Pringles, which are like accidentally vegan as well. They're pretty tasty, just try them out.
Accidentally vegan seems to be quite a theme in these
Yeah.
answers, which is a very Green Party thing. Excellent. So Andrea, what about you? What's your favourite flavour crisp?
Oh my God. It depends on my mood and what I'm eating them with. Maybe sea salt and balsamic vinegar with a bit of cheese, or sometimes, you know, cheese and chive, or sour cream and chive, or prawn cocktail. So I love crisps.
Brilliant. And Nick, what about you? What's your favourite flavour of crisp?
It's probably an unpopular choice, but I really like just salt and pepper flavoured crisps. But it has to have the pepper. Like the pepper makes
Salt
a
and
difference.
pepper.
Yeah, they're pretty edge
Oh.
case.
I'll have to try those. Very edge case, as you say. So the same order again. So we'll start off with Amelia for this next question. And the question is, if you have to give each of the candidates for deputy leader just one present, what would you give them?
After my last question, feeling like an absolute Green Party stereotype, I'll continue on that and be like a tub of hummus, because that's what everybody needs for their Green Party meetings. That's my experience across the country. It's an essential item, apparently.
Soup, bread and hummus seems to be the one there. Cleo, if you had to give everybody just one present, what would you give them?
I would give them free 30 minutes dance workshop with me.
Nice. A nice personal touch there. Tom, what about you? What's your choice of presents for the deputy leader candidates?
I think it might be earplugs so we can sleep really well between these million hustings.
I think that'd be quite a valued gift. Andrea, what about you? What's your choice of present?
I don't know if they're around, but I think some sort of nice virtual tour of some lovely nature reserve after all these hustings would be lovely.
A lot of husting seems to be the theme here, so I can only apologise for adding to those. So Nick, we'll hear your answer last. What would you give each candidate for deputy leader if you could give them just one present?
I generally prefer experience-based presents, so it'd be something more specific to each of them. But if not, I'm sure I could find a good board game for them because I'm mega into board games.
Excellent. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for those answers. And I'm sorry that we now have to go back to the serious 2 to 3 minute time limit. Some more grueling questions for you to get through. But hopefully you'll have a dance workshop to look forward to sometime in the future. So keep your mind on that. So for this question, we're gonna answer it in the order of Nick, then Amelia, then Cleo, then Tom, then Andrea. And this question is, Nick, what more can the Green Party do over the next 2 to 4 years to engage, educate and convince young people of current non-voting age that the Green Party is worth campaigning for and voting for?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I have experienced myself of being someone that grew up, didn't care about politics, didn't think it was relevant for me and didn't think it's something I could get involved in. So hopefully relaying my experience of how I came to understand and educate myself on why politics is such a great way of creating change, I think will be really useful in that. One of the main ways that I'd hope to communicate that with people is reminding people that to vote in an election, you register online for 10 minutes. And then on the day, you turn up for about 10, 15 minutes at most, tick a box, and you've had a say on the next 5 years, depending on snap elections, but hopefully the next 5 years of what the government looks like. I think that's really powerful. It's such a small amount of time to have such a huge say. And yeah, I'd hope that I'd be able to motivate people with that kind of message to get behind voting and get behind voting us, because we seem to be the only ones that can deliver a really great society that does work for everyone, particularly towards young people.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that answer, Nick. So Amelia, what more can the Green Party do over the next 2 to 4 years to engage, educate and convince young people of current non-voting age that the Green Party is worth campaigning for and voting for?
So such an important question, especially given all of the incredible work that the Young Greens have been doing to do just that. And I think it's opening up those conversations is so vitally important. We've seen, during my time as deputy leader across the country, people always ask me, how come we've got the best policies for young people? Whether that's about scrapping student fees and then scrapping student debt, or genuinely talking about a universal basic income while tackling the climate emergency. And I always say it's because young people have been part of our policy-making processes and have a voice on things like GPEX to make sure that we're talking about the issues that are directly relevant to the lives of young people. And that is powerful stuff. And I think that the work you do, I've been really pleased that, well, I was disappointed that there was a delay in hiring a coordinator for the Young Greens. And I did speak out to make sure we tried to get that done faster, because I think it's so vital that you're given the support that's needed. But beyond that, the work that I think I've certainly been doing is about supporting local Young Greens groups as well. We've had incredible events. I loved one in Manchester just last year, before lockdown obviously, and about how we can gather people together who are in universities, in different groups, making sure that we are speaking to people in a way that is, as Nick says, actually accessible and about people's real lives. It's about being in the right communities to make sure that people hear what is relevant to them. And I think that we can do more to be amplifying the work of the Young Greens, because you're the best place to making sure that we are engaging more young people. I think that, yeah, I find the work that you've been doing, especially these last kind of 6 months, probably longer than that actually, just so inspiring about how you've taken the troubles that have happened with lockdown and turned it into an incredible, powerful movement. And yeah, it's just really inspiring stuff.
Thank you very much, Amelia. So we'll move over to Cleo for your answers to the question. So Cleo, what more can the Green Party do over the next 2 to 4 years to engage, educate and convince young people of current non-voting age that the Green Party is worth campaigning for and voting for?
Yeah, there's a few threads to that. I think work through local councils is important, and youth councils, school councils, but I believe that that should not just be in a tokenistic way. And I do see sometimes that youth councils are just peddled out once a year in full council to give a report. I'm sure there's more work that gets done around the year, but I'm not convinced yet that enough councils really take on board the message or the actions needed and put forward by young people. In terms of the work I'm already doing, I'm working with young people to actually encourage them and support them to be able to navigate better the political process, whether that's at a local level or nationally, because I think there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of demystifying politics and making it way more accessible for people to get involved. I'm really proud to say that 2 young people who I've been working with actually submitted statements in the last full council meeting, which is really significant, and I would love to see more of that. In fact, it's always very powerful when a very young person rocks up at full council and has something to say, because everybody has to listen to them. So yeah, making it more accessible. There's been some motions towards votes at 16 anyway, but again, these have largely been ignored. Of course, a great success over there in Wales of having that gone through now. So yeah, it would be about collaborating with Young Greens and other stakeholders to actually see what we can do to encourage more young people to get involved. The climate movement and Black Lives Matter, to an extent, I would say, is youth-led, and that is very significant and must be supported. The young people shouldn't just be left in a vacuum after getting out and making demands, saying what they had to say, but that support should be ongoing. And it's a collaborative support. It's not, we should see ourselves as intergenerational. There's things that as a woman of 40, I can learn from younger people. And I'd like to think there's experience that I can also give to younger people. And just to say, my activism started when I was probably about 6 years old, not just from my mum taking me on demonstrations, but also kitting me out in a t-shirt that said, kids are people too. And I think we need to recognise that young people really matter. And I think as well, it's not just a case of lobbying to decolonise our school curriculums, but I believe it's incredibly important that we instill political understanding and significant life skills into primary schools.
Thanks so much for that answer, Cleo. So Tom, over to you for your answers to this question. And one more time, that question was, what more can the Green Party do over the next 2 to 4 years to engage, educate and convince young people of current non-voting age that the Green Party is worth campaigning for and voting for?
Thank you. Yeah, well, the Green Party's main focus is rightly on the climate emergency, and climate justice is one of the worst examples of intergenerational inequality. So we should be obviously doing what we're doing in terms of highlighting climate injustice. I'd want to protect and expand funding available to the Young Greens, funding and staff availability. I was elected as a member of the Green Party executive between 2016 and 2019. And when I was on the Green Party executive, I voted against a budget, an annual budget, which is something like 2 million during one cycle, because it was proposed to reduce the staff support available to Young Greens. And this is something that I feel really passionate about, making sure that Young Greens have the support they need, because it's a huge group within our party, and people like Tom and Rosie do an awful lot of good work. We should be supporting that. If you see people who look and sound like you're more likely to get involved. So it's a really effective way of getting more young people involved, I think. I would also want for the party and myself to be working with youth organisations like the School Strikers and other groups of young people, which will inevitably emerge over the next 2 to 4 years as a result of a worsening climate emergency and possibly a second wave of austerity and definitely an economic crisis. I'd also want to make sure that the Greens are really actively campaigning for votes of 16 to get that passed into policy. I think that we're at a precipice on that campaign. We had a big debate about that nationally, not just in the Green Party, but all the political parties about 12 months ago in the lead up to the 2019 general election. And we nearly got there. So I think that's something we can win. And also I would like to see at least one Young Green selected as one of our target candidates at the next general election, because it would be fantastic to get a Young Green MP, but also it would be a great opportunity for that young person to step into a really big role, because target candidates do a massive job.
Thanks so much, Tom. So we've got one more answer to this question, and it will be from Andrea. So Andrea, what more can the Green Party do over the next 2 to 4 years to engage, educate and convince young people of current non-voting age that the Green Party is worth campaigning for and voting for?
I think it's for Young Greens to set the agenda, because you know best what those key issues are for young people. I mean, I've got a sense of what they are. I mean, obviously in terms of the climate and generation rent, in terms of housing and mental health issues, and things like sort of getting rid of student debt. But aside from that, I do think it's young people need to lead young people, and it's for the deputy leader and the leaders to support Young Greens, to make sure you've got the resources so that you can set your own agenda, produce literature that you can use at events, and maybe sort of tie in those events with things like Black Lives Matter. You know, obviously make sure you've got Young Greens of colour that are working on that issue in particular, and also things like sort of the young people that have been doing these school strikes for the climate, and that are involved in Extinction Rebellion. I think that's, you know, an obvious route to kind of get them more involved in terms of sort of full-on climate campaigning over the next few years, and that would encourage them to look at the difference with the Green Party policies compared to the other parties, and why, you know, the Green New Deal, the Lucas Green New Deal, is the only one that's going to work, and not the Labour and the other parties. But it's only through kind of engaging with information and material and raising that awareness we're going to do that. And obviously getting votes for 16-year-olds, because yes, Wales and Scotland have have got them. And I think it's crucial that Young Greens campaign really hard to get votes for young people in England too. It seems very unfair that young people don't have that opportunity, and we do need to have more politics and democracy information in schools, but I'm not quite sure how you get that in, because they wouldn't do it for any one particular party unless there was some sort of hustings going on. So I particularly enjoyed the hustings I did for the last general election when I went to sixth form schools and colleges, speaking to young people and hearing what their issues were and what concerned them within their families as well. So yes, Young Greens do a great job and keep doing it, and I hope you get all the support you need from leadership.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that answer, Andrea. So as time is getting on a bit and we're getting hitting 9:15 and we want to be finishing up in the next 20 minutes or so, it'd be great if candidates could start keeping their answers to about 2 minutes or less. To be fair, you've been doing a pretty good job of that so far. So for this next question, we're going to go in the order of Tom, then Andrea, then Nick, then Amelia, then Cleo. And this question is, Tom, what would you do to ensure young trans people can access the medical care they need? So over to you, Tom.
Thank you. Yeah, waiting times for gender identity clinics are completely unacceptable. I mean, I hear about people waiting like 3 or 4 years. And I think there's also quite a lot of geographical diversity, so that different places can access them with different waiting times. This is something that we should be campaigning on as a Green Party, making sure that young people can access the medical care they need, young trans people, and also do what we can to make sure that young people who think they might be trans don't feel scared about approaching services that they might need. That might mean that they want to be able to talk to their parents or speak to their GP, or speak to a different professional. But under the current fairly transphobic environment in the UK, I think that's probably very difficult for young people. So we need to be making sure that healthcare is there, and not with ridiculous waiting times, and also reduce the stigma. Something that I did with LGBTIQ+ Greens was that I coordinated a response to the Health Select Committee on healthcare and trans people's access to it. And I got some first-person accounts, which were, as you can guess, quite bad. But I was really pleased to be able to put those views to MPs. So yeah, but there's a lot to do.
Thank you very much for your answer to that, Tom. So I think we're over to Andrea next. So Andrea, what would you do to ensure that young trans people can access the medical care that they need?
Well, first of all, we need to make sure that the NHS is properly funded. I mean, that's one of the main issues at the moment, because obviously it's not just young trans people that are finding it difficult to get access to medical care, but it's a whole range of people with cancer, you know, the postcode lottery, and everything else, you know, people waiting over a year for urgent operations. And this is a key issue at the moment, because obviously it looks like Boris is trying to sell off the NHS to American healthcare companies, and we might end up with an Americanized healthcare system, which will mean that anything like this would be deemed probably a luxury rather than a necessity. And I think, you know, so that's on the sort of basic care level. I also think young people need access to counselling and mental health support and information first, before they make any decisions about what it is that they want to do, because sometimes, especially in young women, there could well be issues that are to do with you know, social anxiety. I know, because my daughter's had issues like this, so or bullying, or sort of just gender dysphoria doesn't necessarily mean that somebody necessarily wants to go the trans route. And I think it's really important that before people make a very important decision about their lives and their bodies, especially in terms of whether it's about taking hormones or thinking about any medical intervention, they really need to sort of get that help and support first, and not feel pressured into thinking that because they have certain feelings or issues that they are necessarily trans. And some might be, but some might not be. And obviously there's a case going through the House not the House of Lords, but through the Court of Appeal. I'm getting my politics confused here. The Court of Appeal later on this year about somebody who's regretted making an early decision. So I'm not saying, people don't make decisions, but just be careful and not rush into things. But yes, the help and support that young people need should always be there, and on just a basic mental health issue before anything else.
Okay, so we're going to move to Nick's answer to this question next. Nick, sorry, I've lost the question now. What would you do to ensure that young trans people can access the medical care that they need?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult at the moment. As Tom mentioned as well, the waiting times are way too long. And a lot of that is to do with the fact that our NHS is just underfunded and really needs some proper investment to make it work. I think what we could try to do is try and, because it's difficult for us in policy to, obviously we can fight to make the NHS better, but it's difficult for us to do that so easily. I think there are definitely battles we could win when it comes to legislation to do with social transition and also legal transition, because if we can make that easier for trans people, then that will also improve their lives and make it easier for them to transition. I think we need to try and get across the message to other people about how important medical care can be to trans people and how crucial it is for them to have access to it. I think if we can work on changing public perception of that a bit, then it'll be a lot easier to make that happen.
Thank you very much, Nick, for your answer to that question there. So we're going to go over to Amelia next for your answer to this question. And that question once more is, what would you do to ensure that young trans people can access the medical care that they need? Really
powerful question. And I can't help but be reminded when one of my friends came out as trans. And for me, I felt like there was like a penny dropping, like suddenly they understood so much more about themselves. And I really feel like I appreciated some of the struggle that they've gone through to try and understand who they are and come and realize that they were in the wrong body at birth. And I look at what's happened across the country with the increased stigma on trans rights. In the last internal elections, the question on trans women didn't come up at all. And I think it just shows how much has changed in the last 2 years, where people's rights aren't being put first and foremost, and that trans people, effectively the answer to this question is trans people must be listened to, their voices must be heard. They must not be undermined by an assumption that their issues are not valid, whether that's around making sure they've got the right support for transition. I look at the impact here in Wales. I've spoken to people in the trans community. Here in Wales, we don't have any clinic to support trans people. It means that people have to travel to London to have any kind of consultation that is real and will make change happen. Often taken away from their friends and family. Some of them, their family doesn't even support them. So again, being moved into a capital city that people don't recognise and being put through quite a traumatic experience alone. As Tom has said as well, those waiting times, that regional, the regional aspects of where you can get support and where you can't support need to be addressed. But we must make sure that we listen to trans people and don't undermine their voices.
Thank you very much for your answer there, Amelia. So Cleo, we're going to move to you for the last answer on this question. So Cleo, what would you do to ensure that young trans people can access the medical care that they need?
Okay, well, I think there needs to be more funding generally for youth and young people. Youth healthcare and youth provision needs to be better resourced generally. A lot of that had been decimated through austerity. And on the issue of healthcare, some of the waiting lists that I've heard about are absolutely staggering. I think a practical way that we could support would be working with existing lobbying groups where appropriate, and also looking at how he could seek to influence policy in consultation with the people who it affects. I think that is incredibly important. I'm not entirely sure when you say youth, whether you've got a particular age in mind. Can anyone clarify?
I think young trans people here refers to trans people about 25 or under.
Okay, fine. Yeah, then I would be working with and be informed by the Liberation Group, and I do absolutely see myself as an ally, but I don't know if I'd be best placed to lead this work, but I would definitely be an ally.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your answer to that, Cleo. So we're going to move on to, I think, one last substantive question now. And if we could keep our answers to this again fairly short, around the 2-minute or less mark. And we're going to go for this one in the order of Andrea, Nick, Amelia, Cleo, then Tom. And that question is, do you regret the nature of the Unite to Remain Alliance in the 2019 election? So over to you, Andrea.
Blimey, what a question to end on. Right. I didn't think it was particularly a good idea because years ago I was a Liberal Democrat in Portsmouth, and I'd done a lot of work here with the university with young people, working on obviously free tuition, and then the Liberal Democrats did a U-turn. The Liberal Democrats were also in favour of things like the Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership, which we're going to end up with a deal of sorts through Boris with chlorinated chicken. So there's lots of things that are Liberal Democrats, when you look at what they did with the Conservatives, that I don't agree with at all. So I would rather us stand alone, and we do things like campaign on proportional representation to get more Greens in that way, rather than do dodgy deals that never really work in our favour. Yeah, I think that's enough said.
Thank you, Andrea, for that answer. So, Nick, over to you. Do you regret the nature of the Unite to Remain Alliance in the 2019 election?
I don't think that the 2019 alliance was particularly great. It did lead to larger like vote swings within the places where it did happen, but I think having to explain to people on Facebook that there isn't an option for them to vote Green because we've removed that option, I don't think that was a good idea. This doesn't mean that all alliances are bad though. This is an alliance we did, and that doesn't mean we should stop doing alliances forever. The idea of alliances and working together is a good idea in kind of philosophy between people and wanting to work together. And it's also a good idea in terms of us being able to actually do what our purpose of the party is, which is to get elected and then make policy. Like, we have to make the policy happen. And if we're going to just stand alone, we're never going to get elected. Well, not never, but it's going to be a lot harder and it's going to take a lot longer. And we don't have that time with climate change on the horizon and problems with social justice constantly around us. For me, if we were to enter an alliance, one thing I will say, I really want everyone to be able to put Green on their ballot if they want to. I would really hope that that is not something that we negotiate. It is a negotiable, but I would be very against any idea where we have to actually stand down. We'd probably be better off looking at something like prioritising resources with our parties and saying, hey, we're really going to go for this ward. Let us have it. Why don't you look at this ward and try and focus where we're going to campaign more between those parties that don't have their voice representatively heard in Parliament and local government as well.
Brilliant, thanks for your answer to that one, Nick. So Amelia, do you regret the nature of the Unite to Remain Alliance in the 2019 election?
So I actually voted against this work in the national ballot. I was quite clear internally that for me, we need to make sure that we have a big Green campaign and prove our Green values. However, the membership voted to have the alliance and to go out and at least have conversations where essentially we would only talk to people and make an agreement if there was seats that if there was a proper relationship and seats that were effectively part of that negotiation. I think that it's a tough decision to make for everybody who voted, and a tough decision to make to put on the table. But at the end of the day, that's the vote that the membership returned, and I will always respect what the membership says. I think that in the future, people talked about 2017 as well as that basically was a bad deal. And I think that I completely understand, especially Caroline's motivation to be talking about how we can think differently about politics, because I always say that what I want is a green government. I appreciate that's not going to happen in the next 5 years, but what we need to do is create the stepping stones to getting there. And for Caroline, having somebody else in Parliament is a way that we can fundamentally change the way we work and make sure that we're amplifying our voice and making policy in an entirely different way. I think it's important that we do, for me personally, I think it's been important that we've thought differently about politics. I think it's important that we've listened to the membership when those opportunities have been on the table. And I think also when we talk about this, we have to reflect on the fact that in the Welsh Parliament elections, for example, if we did discuss how we could collaborate with other parties, we could still make sure that we keep Green on the list, because for people to vote for, because it's an additional member system, and we could potentially stand down in constituencies while we enable people to vote on the list. Previously, when we've had those conversations, we've worked to stop UKIP, who were using dog whistle racism to try and divide our communities. And I admit that I'm incredibly proud that we took that brave step to ensure that we were having those conversations, because if we can make sure that we can stop those right-wing agendas in their tracks, I think that Greens should do everything that they can to do that. So essentially, in summary, I didn't vote for it, but I respect the members who did. And I think that it was a bold decision. And that, you know, in the future, maybe things will be different, but who knows what might end up on the table, especially when we're trying to beat a first past the post system.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Amelia. And we're going to move to Cleo for the next answer on this question. So Cleo, do you regret the nature of the Unite to Remain Alliance in the 2019 election?
Well, the reality is we started with 1 seat and we walked away with 1 seat. On paper, some of it made sense perhaps, but it failed. I would be interested to look into what is the decision-making process when it comes to such alliances. Of course, yeah, we maybe get a membership vote, but also target to win seats. I'm not sure if the finger is always on the pulse, and sometimes I think the green bubble needs to be burst. And again, that can only really happen once we improve and have more active representation around inputting into decision making. I would say that cross-party is necessary and is useful at times to usher in changes, and that's the best we can kind of do at the moment until we get more Greens elected. And I would just say that, yeah, we absolutely need to keep the pressure on in terms of political voting reform.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Cleo. So Tom, we'd like to move to you to the last answer on this question. So Tom, do you regret the nature of the Unite to Remain Alliance in the 2019 election?
Thank you, Tom. Yes, I do. I regret the way it was done, and I regret that it was attempted at all. It did definitely feel like the Unite to Remain Alliance was imposed from on high, particularly in a party that was next door to my party in the last election. I ran as a parliamentary candidate in the most recent election, and the party next door to ours, which we kind of helped look after because it didn't have many activists, there was a lot of confusion between the local party and HQ. And we were very unhappy about that. And we made that clear to the party leadership at the time. Just for everyone here, I've written for Bright Green about electoral pacts and my views on them. So please do go and search for my name, Progressive Alliance, Bright Green or something like that. So you can find all my views on this. I think that electoral pacts, and in particular Unite to Remain, confuses our message with voters and it alienates passionate Greens. If you're a passionate Green, you want to vote Green. You don't want to vote Lib Dem necessarily. It also lets parties off the hook, and it lets them slide on ambition on climate justice and social justice. So we need to be asking for everyone everywhere to vote Green. If it is done, then it we absolutely need to be giving the final decision to local parties. The ultimate authority in the party is conference, but we need to make sure that local parties are at least consulted if it is something that the binational party is going to pursue. Yeah, so I basically think that we should be asking all voters in England and Wales to vote Green, and not try and do these kind of binational electoral pacts again.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tom. Well, I said that would be the last substantive question tonight. We are running over slightly now, but there is one more really important question that I'd like to ask before we finish and move on to the candidates' final appeals to you. And maybe despite being so important, we could keep the answers to these ones really short, or this one really short. And we're going to go in the order from Cleo to Tom to Andrea to Nick to Amelia on this one. And the question is, of course, Cleo, what is your favourite biscuit?
I like a jammy dodger.
Interesting. Tom, what about you? What's your favourite biscuit?
My favourite biscuit, because they are cheap and because they're vegan and they're a bit chocolatey, is Bourbon creams.
Bourbon. So Andrea, what's your favourite biscuit?
Again, several. I quite like a ginger nut or a dark chocolate digestive or chocolate hobnob.
Excellent. I like the dark chocolate digestive too. Who are we on next? Nick, what's your favourite biscuit?
Firstly, just a fun fact, Jammy Dodgers are now vegan again. After not being vegan for a while, they changed the recipe again, so that's great. The best one is the Bourbon biscuit, but if you want to unlock its secret potential, you have to dip it in a cup of tea and then eat it. And then it's wow, amazing.
Thanks, Nick. So for the last answer on this one, we'll go over to Amelia. Amelia, what's your favourite biscuit?
Just to complement that answer, I love tea. I love tea more than biscuits. Anybody who's ever met me will see me arrive with a cup of tea in hand, and if I'm incredibly lucky, leave with one too. And so I have to go for the best tea dunker, and that is the rich tea. Keeping it simple.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, candidates, for those answers, and thank you very much for your answers through tonight. We're just reaching the end of the hustings here, and sorry that we've slightly overrun, but we have answered a huge number of questions, so that's brilliant. So just before we go, we're going to move to final appeals from the candidates, and just like the start, we are going to stick a hard time limit on these of 2 minutes, and I will be judicial in interrupting you if you do reach that 2-minute mark. And we're going to go for these final appeals in the order of Nick, then Amelia, then Cleo, then Tom, then Andrea. So Nick, if you'd like to kick off with your 2-minute final appeal, please.
I'll try and keep it extra short. I am here because I want politics to be for people. Politics is about people coming together and deciding how they want society to be. And I think I'd be a great person to represent that and be able to reach out to ordinary people and not just political people. When it comes to the climate, there's only 10 years left. And when it comes to people, we can't wait any longer. And if you want politics to be about people, and if you want politics to be about people coming together to deliver a society that works for everyone, then please make me your first choice as Deputy Leader. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Amelia, your 2-minute final appeal, please.
You know me, I'm Amelia Womack. I've been your Deputy Leader for 6 years. You know that I've been clear and consistent and hardworking across the country in communities and with the Young Greens. I've been clear and consistent on policies such as speaking out again about the Queen's speech when they were talking about the impact of that speech on BDS while also making sure that we tackle anti-Semitism at the same time. Those two things are possible to do, and I think it's fundamental that we are very clear about how we talk about these issues at the same time. I've been across the country, I've been in your communities, I've worked to represent you, and I hope that you've had the faith in me of seeing the work that I've done, whether that's organising different campaigns on women's rights, workers' rights, environmental protection, whether that's seeing me co-found Another Europe is Possible and the People's Assembly to make sure that we're changing the debate, and being co-chair of the People's Assembly to make sure we're changing the debate on Brexit and austerity to make sure a left-wing perspective is heard, or whether that's working cross-party to make sure that we change policies in Parliament. I'm a committed campaigner, I'm committed to winning elections, I'm committed to this party, and I hope that you'll re-elect me.
There we go, thank you very much, Amelia. And now, Cleo, over to you for your final appeal, please.
Yeah, it's been great being here tonight, and I'm really up for being the next deputy leader. I think I do have what it takes. I think it is really important, especially amongst Black Lives Matter and everything that's happening, that we have very visible Black representation in our leadership. I thought I would just finish off with a bit of a poem that I wrote a while ago, just for something different. Cut me off if I go on too much. Discarded, forever the rug will be, in recollection, a piece of woolen dermis jettisoned. Why is the dusk so thick with forgetting when Sirius is in plain pageantry? The nocturnal sky new to my eye, a winter's tale astray, horizon scorned and scorched, red with a shepherd's threat. Who were you? Meditate on the outside of the earth. My grandmother drank Irish moss, remnants from the ocean's bed. Hearsay and old wives' tales, now all you've got in all that we've lost. The rug curls, this fraternity that transmits denotation, interrupted like a rinse in the river at moonlight, concealed, covert and requisite. Take the pail and drink in partnership at this juncture, at this vista, hues allied in coalition.
Thank you very much, Cleo. And now for your final appeal, Tom.
Thanks very much. I'm going to keep this super brief because I know we're like over and people want to go do different things. So I'm asking for you to vote for me as number 1 for Deputy Leader of the Green Party, so I can be a strong Green left voice for the party, build back our credibility on trans rights, and get the Greens into power so we can tackle the climate emergency. And you can find all the information about my campaign if you go to my Twitter, which is @TomPashby, and then go into my bio where my link tree is, and it's got all of the videos and interviews and articles. I would like to finally say, please do run for office if you get the opportunity to, as Young Greens, in the party, in public office, for a position in your local party, all those kind of things. Please do go for it because you're really needed and your skills are really valuable. Even if you think that they aren't, even if you feel like you haven't been involved long enough to know all the things, you don't need to know all of the things, you will learn. And please get your friends to join the party by Friday so that you can vote in this leadership election. That's really important.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tom. So now for our final appeal, we're going to go to Andrea. Over to you, Andrea.
Hi, Young Greens. Yes, I would echo what Tom said, that it's really important that we encourage, enable, empower and support young people to gain the skills and gain the information and knowledge so that they can put themselves forward and then progress through the party. I think that's really important. And as Amelia says, lots of Young Greens have come forward with motions for their parties and are doing great stuff. So, you know, I think one of the most important things that the deputy leader and the leaders can do is to listen to what all the liberation groups have to say about their agendas, and to find a way of incorporating that into our party policy and looking at party policy and see where it needs updating, and look at what campaigns need to run on the back of that as well. I've stood 3 times in local elections. I was on the GLA London list, and I've only managed to stand once as general election candidate, and it's all valuable experience, so go for as many of those as you can get. I'd like to run some campaigns with women in the Green Party on climate change, to do cross-party working actually on the Lucas Green New Deal. And I think it's important that women lead on some of this stuff, because it's women and children that are going to be most affected, especially in the developing countries, from climate change. I've already talked about proportional representation. At the last election, I staged a little protest saying that without PR, this is pointless, all those lovely votes we got, and we've still only got 1 MP. So we definitely got to do more on that. Campaigning for things like rent controls and you know, more social housing and stopping the right to buy are really important. And most important of all, I want to improve our equality policies for Greens of colour, disabled people and women. We need a women's rights policy for all those women who make up 51% of our electorate, and obviously half of the Young Greens.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm going to stop you there at the 2-minute mark. But thank you very much, Andrea, and thank you very much to all our candidates tonight for coming along and giving the Young Greens the chance to question you and hear from you. So candidates, you're now free to go. I'm sure some of you haven't eaten dinner yet or have tons of work to get onto tonight. But Young Greens, if you'd like to stay, we're about to hear from Katrina to give some more information about our upcoming event.
Hi everyone, and thank you so much to our candidates, and thank you to Tom for chairing. That was really great. So I know you've done loads and loads of hustings. Obviously ours was the best one, but thank you so much for coming along. What I'm going to do, as we always do at the end of these talks, is put a bunch of links in the chat, and I'll do that now and let you know what they are. So as I said at the beginning, on Friday we have got our House of Lords hustings. So that's for everyone standing to be the next Green representative in the House of Lords. We'll do merge them all into one. That's there. The next link is for people to help run our Young Greens Liberation groups. So we're having our AGMs for those quite soon when we elect new committees and get people interested. We've got lots and lots of different ones. We've got Young Greens Disability Group, LGBTIQA+, under 18, Young Greens of Colour. I'm saying this really fast because there's loads of them, but you can look on the link and look on the website to see what they are a little bit more detail. And there's more information on there about them and how you can stand to be kind of part of that group and part of that committee. On Saturday, I've not got a link for this. On Saturday, we will have our hustings for the Young Greens Executive Committee. So keep an eye out in your inboxes and on our next talk for the link for that. So that is on Saturday at 7 p.m. The next link, there's only 2 more, I promise. The next link is a link that you can click on to donate £2 a month to the Young Greens. If you're in a position to do so, we'd be very, very grateful for that, and it really helps us to be able to plan our work in the future, to know what income we've got coming in, to put on events both online and hopefully in real life soon. So that's the link. And then the final one, as we always do, is our click to tweet. So if you're using Twitter at the moment, please do share that now. If you'd like to post it after 9 a.m. tomorrow, obviously that's also a great idea as well, if you're not using Twitter at the moment. But if you click on that link, it'll open up your Twitter with a pre-filled tweet where we put words in your mouth, as Rosie always says. And you can edit it as well, but it will give you, say you've been along to this hustings and it was great and you heard from our candidates, and we'll post a link to our next hustings on Friday. So that was all from me, your headline act for the evening. And I will pass you back to Tom to say goodbye quickly.
Well, thank you very much, Katrina, and thanks everybody for coming along. We'll see you Friday. It's been great to have so many along. Brilliant. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. See you all soon.